Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining and kind of accommodating this slightly different time for our weekly water talks. Um, yeah, looking forward to the discussion here today. We've got David Topman with Innovize with us, and maybe more importantly, look at this new branding we got from Innovize Marketing. But anyways, looking forward to discuss kind of this new infrastructure bill and kind of where it might intersect with some of our Innovize software solutions. All right, so again, you've got two hosts from Innovize here today. You've got myself, Tim Medeiros. I've been with Innovize for 5 years now, worked in technical services and support and also pre-sales, making sure we have the right solutions for our different utility and engineering consultants' needs here. I've kind of specialized in some of our asset management solutions, which is what we'll be touching on a bit here today at the end, but I'm very happy to have kind of a mentor of mine here with us here today, David Topman, Vice President of Asset Management here, as well as many other roles here at Innovize. David, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself briefly.
Oh yeah, thanks, Tim. And Tim, it's been a pleasure, and I find myself learning from you in many instances. So kudos, great job that you're doing here with the Water Talks. David Topman, I'm the Vice President of Asset Management here at Innovize. So I'm responsible for strategic direction, making sure kind of existing products, but more importantly, our future products incorporate best practices within asset management based on my experience as a practitioner at Colorado Springs Utilities, based on my work with the American Society of Civil Engineers, and my role in the ISO 55000 Technical Committee 251 for the U.S. Technical Advisory Group. So yeah, it's been a pleasure, and joining Tim today, and we're talking a bit about the infrastructure bill.
Perfect. Thanks, David. So as usual, again, this is Water Talk, so please do put your questions in as you kind of come up with them during David and I's presentation here. I think for this presentation, we might try to answer just most questions at the end instead of throughout, but please do put that question in whenever it kind of comes to mind there, and we'll look forward to addressing it. As far as upcoming events and future Water Talks topics, next week we'll be looking at another perspective on the infrastructure bill. Today we'll really be focused on kind of just general overview and some lead and copper rule kind of intersections and practices, but next week we'll specifically looking at stormwater infrastructure because there's definitely some language in there dealing with stormwater specifically. And then the weeks following that, October 26th and November 2nd, we'll be diving into water quality analysis. So on October 26th, we'll be looking at water distribution modeling in terms of water quality with InfoWater Pro. And then November 2nd, we're happy to be joined by Chris Rank from Black & Veatch, who will be taking a deep dive into InfoWorks ICM. So both will be pretty technical discussions. Both modelers, again, Sean Huang from Innovize and Chris Rank, many years of experience there. So looking forward to those. And then on Thursdays, coming up in just, I guess, the next week now, really, we'll be going into, I have a little mini series on what's new in Info 360, and that will be at our usual time, but on Thursdays there. Okay. So to just begin our discussion here today, I asked this question during our last week's Water Talks, knowing that we were going to be talking about the infrastructure bill this week. And I asked the question, what's your biggest interest in regards to the very much still in progress? And that is definitely a caveat we want to make up front. We understand, as many of you probably do too, that the infrastructure bill still has not passed. It keeps getting pushed back. And now it's looking like maybe the end of this month, but assuming it does, what are your biggest interest in regards to, again, the very still much in progress infrastructure bill? And it looks like, for the most part, your questions, your interests were pretty general. How does this relate to water? What are the best ways to access funding, and a little bit of everything? So that's what we'll mostly be focused on today, and that David will touch on today, kind of higher level look at the bill and how it affects those of you that work with utilities or are working at a utility for the most part. And then next week, the smaller things that people weren't as interested in, I guess, the green infrastructure and stormwater resiliency, those are definitely large parts of the bill we've noticed. So we'll take a look at those next week in particular. Anything else you wanted to add looking at these results here, David, before I pass it over to you for the rest of the presentation?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. We'll just go ahead and jump in.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'm gonna pass presenter to you. There you
Okay,
go.
and I should be able to do. There we go. Okay, kind of get this out of the way here. All right. Yeah, so what I'd like to do kind of today, talk a little bit, give some background, just if admittedly, this may not be one of the most exciting, topics, but I think it's actually one of the most important that we as water professionals should at least have a working knowledge of what's going on in our nation's capital. I've been involved with water pretty much my whole life, and actually was a regulator at one point in time. So this is a subject near and dear to my heart, but again, we've run into regulations kind of throughout our professional careers. So again, we may not be directly involved, but it's always something to be important to know, because it helps you talk to your neighbor, communicate with maybe any nonprofits you're working in, and such. So it's a good you know uh, piece of information to kind of understand. So we're going to go through a little bit of history of the regulations very quickly, talk a little bit about some of the language, and then of course, Tim is going to do what he does best and show you some of our software and actually how you could apply some of the topics that we're talking about, right within one of the incentivized solutions. And so, we are here talking about the infrastructure bill did pass the Senate earlier this year, but of course it's now in the House, and that's where all the kind of the discussions are going on and the negotiations, and so what the bill in its current permutation, my gosh, the thing is, it seems to be changing almost every day. Here we go. So say this bill is kind of a culmination of many of its predecessors. We all got into water, and back in the 1970s they passed the Clean Water Act, and then shortly thereafter the Safe Drinking Water Act, and this is really the foundation of everything that we are doing as water utilities, sanitary sewer, and even stormwater, and really is protecting the waters of our nation, and making sure that the water is safe to drink for our citizens. And what was kind of an important point is these were there were grant monies established, right? So this was money set aside by Congress to actually provide to water utilities to build infrastructure, and it was grant, so there was no expectation of repayment. It wasn't a loan, it was a grant, investing in America. Fast forward a bit into the 90s, we started understanding a little bit more about contaminants and kind of the difference between main infrastructure that the utilities had in the city streets versus the service lines and plumbing that were in people's homes. And so we came out in the 90s with the lead and copper rule that started to address some more specific drinking water standards. And then in the 2000s, it really became kind of sewer's turn, if you will, with the sanitary sewer overflows, or SSOs, and the capacity management operations maintenance, CMOM. And so, it was, to me, CMOM, was really some of the early aspects of, asset management. It was just basically, how are you going to operate your utility? It kind of common sense, right? Then in the 2010s, we really saw kind of the states kicking in and kind of upping the asset management game. Michigan started off with SAWS, and then Ohio followed up with Senate Bill 2, and of course New Jersey had its Water Quality Act. And so they really started saying, okay, to manage a quality utility, you really need to have a, like an asset management plan, and please, submit your plans to the state, and we'll work with you and give you the resources you need. So really, the term asset management really started picking up here in the U.S. With respect to, asset management plans. In 2018, and if you recall, Innovize had a whole boot camp. We had a 5-part boot camp, and if you wanted more about that, just go to innovize.com, look in there in our webinars, and you'll see the boot camp free of charge. It's recorded. But it talked about America's Water Infrastructure Act. There was 2 parts. There was kind of the assessment, right, which really was the asset management part, and then you were to take that assessment and update your ERP, your emergency response plans, which most of you have had ERPs for decades. This was based on your knowledge of, risk to your infrastructure. How would you adjust your emergency response plans? And most of the compliance dates should be up by now. I think there are some, the smaller systems have, gosh, I'm trying to remember the dates, but it's falling within this year. So hopefully all of you have, filed for OWIA compliance, and I'm sure you have, and updated most of your plans. In 2020, we saw some very interesting movement in the state of Florida, very much driven towards sanitary sewer, just because most of you that know Florida, it's a karst topography, and depth to groundwater, I like to say, is like 6 inches, right? I mean, the whole state, there's lots of water in Florida, but they found a direct correlation of septic systems and even sewer laterals intermingling with the groundwater, and so there was just direct correlation there. And so they passed some additional laws, regulations in the state of Florida to make sure that people were kind of managing their systems, right? And making sure they understood, the causal relationships between the different systems down there. Well, today we're right kind of in the thick of a lead and copper rule revision, and talk a little bit more about that. But we're also, I'd like to talk a bit about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, specific to drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. While not necessarily regulations, what you've started to see, the American Society of Civil Engineers, which I represent them on ISO 55000, there's a lot more conversation about these asset management plans. If you notice the report card, America's report card there in 2017, no mention of asset management whatsoever. In 2021, it's almost on every other page. It's awesome to see asset management being discussed, at the highest levels. With respect to the revised lead and copper rule, they're still gathering input. They were supposed to have input, culminated by now, but they did an extension because of the interest in the lead and copper rule. The compliance was also delayed until October of 2024. And really the revisions, what has gotten people kind of, a lot of the conversation, it's focused a lot, on the service lines. Of course, we've all heard about Flint, Michigan, and, the lead service lines. And so they're really kind of upping the game in, testing for lead in our drinking water, these triggers to jumpstart mitigation much earlier, which is where we Innovize can help with, various technologies to understand kind of the impact or risk, that complete lead service line replacement, right? That's a big focus on that, the testing in the schools and childcare, and then, kind of basically exposing the amount of lead service lines in your systems out there and making these, publicly known, or making them publicly known. And our friends at DC Water have been one of the leaders in getting ahead of this ruling and, identifying their lead service lines. They have a very interactive website that, is based on GIS, and, you can find that out now. There's gosh, dozens of others across the country. Would be happy to try and link you up with the various folks that, if you're thinking of doing a kind of a public map of lead service lines, we can connect you with those that are doing it today. Within the infrastructure plan itself, there's multiple acts that are part of the overall legislation. Very specifically in drinking water, the advanced, Section 112 is advanced drinking water technologies, but they're also really, targeting small systems, right? Because they're the ones a bit most challenged with technology and resources. So they're definitely trying to, lift our rural community. And Section 213 on, water data sharing pilot programs. Can you say cloud? I know Tim in many of his water talks has talked about publishing web services and making this information available via web maps or story maps, or in putting it into mobile systems. So clearly we see web services as the language of the future in exchanging data. As Tim said, there'll be more, I believe, in the next water talk about stormwater infrastructure. But really, there's a lot of language in the bill about green infrastructure, which we've been doing this. We've had major cities leading the way, like Philadelphia and such, on green infrastructure. But this is a technology that, and that Incentivized has definitely been aware of. We are very involved in the UK, where they have very advanced sustainable drainage system regulations, and our software is being used to comply over there across the pond. But green infrastructure is definitely in the bill and coming to America. And Section 219, the Advanced Clean Water Technology Study, really one of the things that floated up was cybersecurity, and much ado if you've heard about the Oldsmar treatment facility in Florida. It's really trying to educate and get systems a bit more up to speed with cybersecurity, where again, cloud technologies kind of come into play in terms of security that are really at the Department of Defense level, right, in terms of security. The Water Quality Protection Job Creation Act, got into smart wastewater infrastructure, and really specifically, for the first time I've seen, called out artificial intelligence for use in treatment plants, right? The ability to use AI, and of course, Incentivized is suited very well to help with that particular portion of the bill. And then there's just a whole suite of sustainability provisions that really get us into the core of Incentivized technology, with hydraulic and hydrologic modeling, for both natural and built systems. And then there's a whole suite of other acts that I'm really not going to go into, the Assistance Quality Affordability Act, the LIFT Act, the LSWRPI. They go on and on and on. And I think that's where a lot of the conversations being had in the House right now on is some of these other acts that are also talking about social infrastructure or human infrastructure that goes along with our typical civil infrastructure of pipes and bridges and all those other things. And I've been quite proud working with the American Society of Civil Engineers. We started providing language, last year, and delivered to Congress, our perspective of what needs to be in the act and what some of the higher priorities are. So thrilled to have been part of the asset management language input into the bill. Just a quick word, the funding, that's been just all over the place. There's parts where 125 million to 55 billion, very specific to water. There's also lots of investment into energy, into transportation, into telecommunications to help curb this digital divide as far as cellular and Wi-Fi capabilities within, say, rural America. But one of the key things that I think, again, this is just a kind of a general education and not focus on this too much. When you start hearing the term like financing, that's very specific to loans, like the state revolving funds and such. Those really, it's financing for infrastructure loans, whereas we've been really pushing for funding, which is grants, kind of a throwback to the 70s with the Clean Water Act, is just because, you know, a lot of utilities out there, you know, that just don't have the wherewithal to pay back some of these loans based on their rate cases and such. And so, you know, we are definitely have been pushing for grants to kind of get this reinvestment in America to satisfy some of our aging infrastructure needs. Laced, I guess, you know, throughout all of this infrastructure, we see terms like, you know, modern infrastructure. So modernizing our infrastructure, modernizing our utilities, taking them through this digital transformation that everyone's been going through, especially, you know, with COVID. Lots of discussion about asset management, which again, near and dear to my heart, and I think Tim's heart here, you know, is bringing asset management to the forefront as part of our infrastructure management. Lots of words and language in there about green infrastructure, which of course leads us right into our sustainability, resiliency, conversations about affordability, when you know, in terms of investing in this infrastructure and you know, the rate cases that customers are paying, but lots of conversation about equity. You will hear, you know, sections, you know, for improving infrastructure for disadvantaged communities. And if you've been following some of my activities, it really is getting into, you know, as an you know, in the civil engineering practice, us understanding more about what they call social determinants of health. And that really is kind of probably wasn't in most of our education, you know, when we were taking, you know, engineering core classes, but it really has become a thing of conversation in infrastructure. And it was, you know, as you all know, we've been purchased by Autodesk. So I've been privileged to work with the grander scheme of Autodesk, holistic infrastructure management. I was fortunate enough to publish an article in the Civil and Structural Engineer magazine that kind of talked about this holistic right-of-way management, both water and transportation, what that means, you know, within the infrastructure bill. But then also I was quite honored yesterday to be in a panel with former Governor Martin O'Malley, and he had an entire presentation on, you know, equity and infrastructure. And so if you're interested in some of that, we can give you the links. I believe that's all free, and there will be a recorded session. But he really, you know, made the case of, you know, bringing equity into the conversation. And if we think about it with asset management, you know, it's about value. And some of our disadvantaged communities, you know, investing in them, they will see the biggest percentage value gained, if you will, from infrastructure investment. So again, highly encourage you to, there's an entire 5-week program of infrastructure from the Asset Leadership Network. And we kicked it off yesterday with former Governor O'Malley. You know, where does this apply? What does incentivized intersect with all of this? Well, you know, we have a rich heritage and reputation for managing, you know, clean water across the globe. You know, we believe we have state-of-the-art technology and an easy-to-use platform. And, you know, some of you might question some of that, but, you know, again, we're taking a very complex science and putting it into these solutions that make managing the complex much more easy. The incentivized digital AMP, and I think that's where, you know, Tim's going to talk a bit more about that today, that, you know, we have a workflow that really helps build all the contents you need for an asset management plan, but it's digital, right? It's codified into a framework that allows you to constantly update it and not just have a, you know, paper plan sitting on the shelf somewhere. It's a living, breathing document that helps you drive your capital decisions as well as daily, you know, maintenance decisions. And really what we're looking for is you start to see with the bonding agencies, and what you see a lot in this bill is, you know, having these plans, and really they're kind of the collateral, you know, for any of the future federal, state, local funding, you know, and financing is, I have a plan. I know what to do with the money you're about to give me. Right, I can put it to the best use to lift our community because this is the logic I use to make my decisions, and that's quite really a lot what Tim's going to talk about a bit more now. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, David, for kind of giving that intro and kind of generally where um, we fit in as Innovize in the bill as a whole, right? I think you had on the screen there some of the important numbers in terms of the bill as well. I mean, it's a 1.2 trillion-dollar bill at the moment, but there's like a small portion is allocated to water, and an even smaller portion of that is allocated to grant funding. So that's what everybody should want, right? To help their communities, that grant funding. And I guess this next section of the presentation I'll be kind of walking everybody through is just how to use an example. There's lots of different examples we could probably work through with Innovize. We'll do more kind of on the stormwater side next week, but here's one example that we kind of came up with in terms of how you can use Innovize software to help, like you were saying, David, kind of justify your grant application for one of those different sections, one of those parts of what is a pretty massive bill. So yeah, that's what we'll walk through right now here. So um, the software in particular we'll be looking at in this example today is one I know pretty well, Info Asset Planner. It's our asset performance solution here at Innovize, one of our asset performance solutions that is really good at taking data that might be really well organized, things from GIS, CMS, Excel, taking that raw data and starting to use it in clever ways, I guess you could say, right? It's one thing to have organized data. It's another thing to start saying, how can I use this data to inform, what happens next to my pipes, what happens next to my manholes, what happens next to my, wet infrastructure network as a whole in a way that it is, again, justifiable, makes sense. I can show why certain dollars are going here or there, and then plug that back into my day-to-day and start bringing this full circle, right? So Info Asset Planner really is this kind of like toolbox full of asset management, asset performance tools, if you will, to help you as a consultant, you as a utility, make those more informed decisions and plug those back in so you can show this very kind of sustainable and transparent workflow of taking raw data and turning it into action that changes your wet infrastructure network here. All right. So thinking about this, that example, that kind of chevron diagram I show all the time in different presentations, it made sense to use that same diagram to show, okay, here's how you can use that software maybe, and with different data sources, with boots on the ground, if you will, with all the hard work utilities and consultants are doing to take you to maybe that successful grant application, right? So again, if you're looking at the blue section, it again starts with that raw data, that asset registry, that GIS, that inspection data. A lot of times we see CCTV data or, main inspection information, main break information. It starts there, right? And after that, in this example, we'll look at, okay, well, and in this example, we'll be looking at specifically at identifying and prioritizing lead pipe replacements. A good chunk of the money in the bill, I think it was 15 billion of that kind of 55 billion that's allocated to water. 15 billion is allocated specifically and targeted towards lead pipe replacement. Further incentivizing utilities to really attack this issue that, again, we've known about for a while. So the next part of this, building a successful grant application, might be having a means, a way to do that testing, right? So it's something we'll look at in the example in Info Asset Planner. How do you prioritize? If you've got thousands of pipes in the ground, how do you prioritize which ones to inspect or survey or test first, right? Next, other things that might go into this. David was mentioning equity was a large part of kind of the language around some of these conversations in the bill. And there's easy ways to actually incorporate that into your model here, your decision-making process. One of the things kind of David brought to my attention, I was making this presentation, was this social vulnerability index that is freely accessible that you can easily plug into your model and use in your decision-making criteria. So how can we bring in some of that information to, again, prioritizing where we're replacing and inspecting our lead service lines and things like that. Hydraulic model, always going to be important, especially if you're looking at your wet infrastructure network and you're in an invised presentation. We're always going to recommend that hydraulic model, and incorporating that is a good thing to do. After that, kind of these next two, transparent decision making and budgeting project by project and by year, are tools within Info Asset Planner to very easily show, okay, here's all my data here that I've gathered here, maybe on the left here. Um, Here's how I'm showing I'm going to be creating different projects, either based on kind of proximity, and then here's how I'm going to group different pipes and mains together to inspect or replace those, or here's how I'm going to budget and prioritize. I know something like answering the question like, I know I need to inspect and replace all my lead service lines over the next 5 years, say. Here's how I'm going to actually hit those numbers and stretch my budget over those 5 years to get to all those in time. So I have different tools in the software to look at that. And then kind of going back to some of the raw data inputs in here, how can we use the decision-making process in Info Asset Planner once we kind of get to the end? We say, okay, here are the pipes, here's what I need to replace, here's the dollars that's going to go into that. How can you combine that with the rest of the 1.2 billion in infrastructure funding, right? Water is just a small piece of this, but how can you use all the work you've done and maybe a software like Info Asset Planner to say, you know what, if I'm going to be replacing a pipe here, and the pipe's been in the ground since, forever, because it's a lead pipe and we stopped using lead pipes a long time ago, I bet the road isn't great either, or I bet the other utility services next to that aren't great either, or the sidewalk, right? So how can you combine some of the decision making you're doing in Info Asset Planner to not only get funding for your utility for water, but other parts of your utility or your municipality's infrastructure as well. So all these combined, hopefully lead to that kind of successful grant application. And this example, looking at lead service lines in particular, is something we'll look at in this example in here. All right. So let me go in live to Info Asset Planner here. All right. So what you see is our software, again, Info Asset Planner, which is an extension of Esri's ArcMap. But the one example here, again, I'll go through is looking particularly at how could you use this software to prioritize, inspecting and replacing lead service lines over a particular time period, right? So in this network, you can see I've kind of highlighted my lead service lines here in red. So we know of some lead service lines we might have, but I also know that there are a number of lead service lines that might be unknown material, and these are ones I might want to be prioritizing for inspection, right? So again, looking at all those different data sources I was presenting earlier, we're going to look at how we can more kind of systematically prioritize those. We've had many customers of Info Asset Planner use the software to prioritize, instead of just doing CCTV inspections block by block by block, how do I prioritize and look at the ones that most are at highest risk that might need those CCTV inspections earliest or sooner, and same thing, maybe can be done for potential lead service lines here. So looking at the different tools in Info Asset Planner, kind of one of the core tools within Info Asset Planner is looking at consequence of failure, adding it with likelihood of failure to give you an overall risk analysis, risk score for your network. And here is where you can start to plug in those different parameters I was mentioning earlier. So in particular, I'll kind of be calling out, and we'll talk about in a second here, in the decision tree are, looking at the intersection with road work. How are my mains right now, my mains and my service lines intersecting with planned road work for this coming year? How does that kind of plug into consequence of failure? You don't want to be, ripping up that road to replace that main, which you found out there were, half a dozen lead service lines attached to it next year when you could have done it at the same time you were working on that road. I had a question in the chat, can you elaborate on the social vulnerability index, building successful grant application slide. Where is that from and who developed it? It was mentioned it was publicly available. Where is that? So these are parameters here I've plugged into consequence failure. These directly kind of call on the social vulnerability index that I've added to my map here. And this is something that's super easy to add to any of your GIS maps, whether they're Info Asset Planner or not. But you simply come up here to add data from ArcGIS Online. The CDC, I think, is who developed this. It'll
Yep.
confirm this here in a second. CDC's Social Vulnerability Index from Data CDC. You can see there's a ton of different fields in here to look at. On my map, you can see I've color coded to kind of overall ranking of the different neighborhoods, and this is looking at the actual kind of tract data, right, David? I mean, there's a county-wide SVI data, but this is looking at tracks here, so we can get really specific, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's that's the one thing I say that that's just part of the whole Esri ecosystem, right? And we focus a lot on the software, but there's a wealth of data that's in their living atlas, right? And I when I worked at Esri, really talked about the living atlas as it is the asset registry of planet Earth, and that's where Tim has showed soil, corrosion data, right? That's coming out of Esri, which is basically a copy of the federal government's, their soil from the Soil Conservation Service, the StatsCo data sets, right? So there's corrosion data. This is important. The Social Vulnerability Index from the CDC, most of us have used, data from the federal poverty level, which is just really income, right? And what the CDC has done, because it's kind of what they call social determinants of health, they've blended lots of attribution into this that really, this is where public health and public infrastructure go hand in hand. And so it's a very, it's an authoritative data source that you as a utility can use almost without question, right? Because it's coming from the CDC. They have a standardized methodology by which they've created this index. It's widely accepted as the authoritative resource when it comes to understanding this social vulnerability. So it is something in the Living Atlas. As you're an Esri customer, it's all part of your licensing, and you can bring it into your analyses. And I think it's this, not only the lead and copper rule revisions, but this infrastructure bill has really caused an awakening of elevating this social vulnerability into our decision making, because again, assets have an intent to serve, and wow, you can get your biggest bang for the buck if lifting up these communities with poor infrastructure. That's it's not only a noble thing to do, it's the right thing to do, but it's really, from an infrastructure perspective, the logical thing to do. And so, yeah, I highly encourage you to kind of go shopping in the Living Atlas and take a look at a lot of the data sets that are there. But Tim's doing a great job of showing the SVI.
Yeah, definitely super useful data set there. A lot of different fields, kind of giving you a lot of great information just on the different communities that are within your jurisdiction, your municipality, your utility, and yeah, a lot of different ways to look at that and use them to, again, for successful grant applications to provide for those same communities. So again, just a little zoom in just to show everybody, here's an example of our main line here in this particular network. I've got the different service lines here, lead service lines. But again, a lot of different data sources I've pulled in here. I've pulled in two different ways of looking at that SVI. They're looking at poverty percentage, as well as kind of the overall score, weighing all those different factors I was just showing a second ago that are organized within that particular feature layer. After that, looking at likelihood of failure. In here, I kind of pulled in kind of our standard likelihood of failures, install date, material, but if we're looking at specifically lead service lines attached to our mains, we might look at things like, how uh, does the main have more than one or at least one lead service line attached to it? Yes or no? So that's a pretty simple one. But we can look even closer, and if we've got meters in our GIS, we've got maybe average flow from those, maybe that comes from our hydraulic model. We might look at, dig into that a little deeper and say, okay, if I've got a service line attached to a main, maybe one is lead, two are lead, what's the demand from those lead meters that that service line might be attaching to? If there's a lot of demand from those, maybe that's a higher priority, right? If there's lower demand, maybe that's less of a priority or a likelihood of failure, a particular contamination event, something we should be looking at. Further, we could say, okay, what's the count of lead service lines attached to that main? Is there 1, 2, 10? How does that help me in terms of prioritizing where I need to inspect and replace versus things that might uh, be a little bit more long-term, right? So again, a lot of different ways to kind of combine this. We've got the risk kind of module within Info Asset Planner. We can take those raw LOF and COF scores, and you can see, okay, what might be those areas, those hotspot areas, where I might have, the highest risk or extreme risk in some cases, versus those areas that might be a little bit lower of a priority. But it's not the perfect analysis, right? Risk analysis can only take you so far. It's subjective. It's using numbers from 0 to 10, and here is kind of frankly a pretty perfect example in this model I created. The 5 highest scoring pipes are all kind of scattered in here in my risk analysis, but I know I've got an area in my kind of northwest or northeast, excuse me, corner over here where I've got a main that has almost every line attached to it has been identified as a lead line. So we can dig a little bit deeper than just kind of basic risk analysis in Info Asset Planner with our decision tree tool. So decision tree tool, again, very flexible. I've got some examples in here from different utilities we've worked with, dividing it up between, large diameter mains, small diameter mains, just looking at preventative maintenance or O&M versus capital planning. A lot of different ways to use this, but in this example here, I'll walk through a decision tree that specifically looks at, again, how to prioritize mains that might be attached to those lead service lines here. So uh, again, you can see how this gets a little more granular and how we go from, instead of the risk analysis where we're just looking at kind of red areas versus green areas, high priority areas, kind of heat map of our network. Here we're coming up with particular actions we need to do based on the data we've gathered here. So, and again, this is just an example. You could build these out in a ton of different ways. But in this example here, maybe the first question we're asking is this pipe intersecting with future road work that's being planned in 2022, maybe? If it is, perfect. This is a way to do this replacement of this main and start looking at those service lines. And if you have the jurisdiction, I guess, or if you have the right to replace those service lines, replace those as well. So if it is intersecting road work and there is more than one lead service line on that particular pipe, let's go ahead and replace that main, replace the service lines connected to that main. If not, then let's look at what that risk score is. If it's a high or extreme risk, maybe it's worth kind of sending a home lead service line kind of inspection kit to the homeowners there, right? And make that a high priority so we can prioritize these different inspection levels. I've kind of have 1 as high priority and groups that are labeled 2 as lower priority, right? So we can do that, and even if our risk analysis doesn't catch those, we can say, okay, well, if we're if we're doing work on that road and it doesn't have an inspection or it doesn't have a lead service line attached to it, but we know that pressurized main was installed before 1950, let's go ahead and still take a look at that because there's still a good chance that there could be lead service lines there. All right. Coming down this branch here, we can bring in some of our data points like the demand from that pipe. Maybe there's no road work occurring on that pipe in the future, but what's the demand from that pipe? If it's high demand, there's a good chance of contamination events from any possible lead service line there. So let's have a utility lead inspection effort go out there. If we've gotten past service requests from that particular homeowner that's been associated to that nearest pressurized main, that could be an indication of a lead pipe maybe. So let's prioritize those. And then here's the social vulnerability index score. This should be 0.5, but if that social vulnerability index score is greater than a certain value, after looking at what those values are on average for your community, and the age of that pipe is relatively old, maybe that warrants a particular inspection. If it's not that old, maybe it's not as high of an inspection priority, right? Maybe it's not in the next 6 months or year or 2 years, but maybe it's in the next 3, 4, 5 years kind of thing. You could have as many of these different kind of levels of priority, different buckets, if you will, as you want. Next, you might ask, okay, well, does it have one lead service line attached to it? If yes, replace, look at install dates, look at, again, that risk analysis to really prioritize when should different inspection or replacement activities occur on your particular network here. And so then the idea is once this is complete here, once this is complete, you've run through that decision tree. Now you've got, again, a very visual and very kind of defensible way to show how you got to different budgetary numbers, right? Behind each of those actions, you can have a cost associated to those. So here I've, through my decision tree, I've suggested that a certain main should be replaced. I can see, how it traveled through my decision tree and kind of see that full audit trail. So here I see it did have a service line of lead attached to it, so it's being suggested for replacement. If I wanted to override that, I could certainly do that. I can see the details for the different different costs that might go into that overall replacement cost. So you can see the replacement is the bulk of the actual cost of the actual main, and the service line is part of that cost as well there, because there's just one on that particular pipe. But then from there, I can, once you have all of these rehabs, suggested rehabs laid out for you, you can say, okay, well, I know I'm going to actually need to do these in a certain time period. So you can come in here, say, run budget plan, say, I know this is what my budget is going to be for the next 5 years or so. I know how it's going to increase, hopefully not decrease. I know I'm going to want to do all the different rehabs for everything above a certain risk threshold. And then when you do that, Info Asset Planner can start to assign, based on those different risk levels, what activities should be done. Whoop. There we go. Let's go all my pipes in each given year here. So in this example here, you can see your budget in that initial year compared to your overall plan cost, what it was able to fit into that initial budget. You're under budget for the first 2 years. You go a little bit over the next 3 years. But the good news is you're able, everything within your rehab ends up being in a particular phase in this example here. Okay, and if you couldn't fit everything in your budget in 5 years, if you had to change this up, not that one, if you had to change this up and say, oh gosh, my budget is not going to be nearly that big, right? I'm only going to have that much. You might run this tool and it's not going to be able to place everything. You can bring that information back to your grant and say, look, I'm short this amount of money. This is how much I need in order to address all the lead service lines in my network here. Again, either way you want to look at that, it is possible here. And then the last thing to point out is so that's looking at replacements or inspections over kind of a time period here. But say you wanted to start to group those lead service line replacements into kind of project areas, if you will. So here's an example of kind of a logic that's been put together to say, if you're looking at inspections or replacements or repairs, try to put all of those into geographic areas that really make sense here. So here's a number of different main line replacements that are all high priority because this is project number one, that have all been kind of grouped into one particular area. Here's 23 different assets that are all connected to each other that have all been grouped into an inspection area here, if you will. So just a couple different ways to kind of slice up those different recommendations that come out of your decision tree that you can use to justify, here's the different projects I want to do, where they're at, and what time I want to maybe do those, and here's how much they're going to cost. All right, so that was all the demo I had there. Let's see, looking at the questions here now. Any that jump out to you, David? Any thoughts you had before I dive into some of these questions here in the last 10 minutes?
No, I think there's actually, a handful of questions that will, take us down some interesting conversations. And actually, I've got, some of the answers to that. And do you just want to jump right into these?
Yeah, go for it. If you see one you like, take it.
Well, so there's the one question, and service lines, the challenge of having accurate information on service lines has always been, again, I came from a utility, and service lines just aren't, those really aren't your assets. You own the stub portion, right? This that goes from the main in the street to typically the sidewalk, the stop box, whatever it might be. That secondary valve. You own that, and so you might have information on those. It's probably in like index cards. We have these file cabinets with service line index cards, and but from the stop box to the home, we had no idea. Was it galvanized? Was it copper? Was it plastic? Was it lead? We just really didn't know because it wasn't that wasn't in our data. It wasn't our service line, the yard portion, right? So we knew our stub, and usually when you replace the main, you go ahead and replace the stubs as well, right? But so the challenge has always been just accurate information, and that's why Tim was kind of walking through the unknown, right? If the bulk of that may be unknown, so the conservative, the safest approach is to assume that they are lead, and then you can kind of bring them into your prioritization, and maybe some spot checks would declare that no, these aren't lead, these are galvanized. But that's kind of an interesting point that Tim's talked about in many other presentations, that exacting data, if you don't have, you can actually infer data. That's one of the nice tools within info asset planners to kind of infer information, because you could kind of say, well, I don't know anything about service lines, but gosh, all of these properties are pre-1950, as he said. So they could be lead, right? Because we banned lead in the 90s, if I recall, but it was best practice in the 30s, right? So many of your homes, if you have your parcel date or something like that, if it's in the those homes were installed in the 30s and 40s, chances are they have lead service lines, because that's what plumbers use. That was state-of-the-art technology back then. Now, you may or may not know, did the homeowner replace their service line? That's really kind of hard to tell. But again, you can kind of infer even from vintage dates that these have a possibility of being lead, if you will. If it's new subdivisions, gosh, again, lead was banned in the 90s, so for a fact it most likely can't be lead. So the question though is, what percent of the country has lead service lines? Gosh, if you look at the ranges, they vary from 6 to 10 million service lines. There's 139, 140-ish million homes, plus however many commercial businesses. So if you look at that percentage, it's like 6%, across the entire U.S. And so a lot of this infrastructure bill is to help, eradicate many of those lead service lines. But again, Tim showed you a way to kind of, you assume maybe worst case scenario and use other pieces of data to prioritize. So, again, we know 6%. Now, is the funding proposed sufficient to replace every lead service? Not yet. Depending upon what math you use, it's going to make a big dent, but I don't think it's actually enough to cover everything out there.
Yeah.
So Tim just has an example data set. Results are going to vary, across all the different, your specific municipalities. Now, the other question was this social vulnerability index. Is it open data? We're using, obviously, as an Esri partner, it's our part of the Living Atlas. It's so easy to just bring right into ArcMap. They do have an open data site. So if you go to the CDC, it's actually the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. So if you just Google ATSDR, SVI, it'll take you right there. You can download a shapefile or a CSV if you already have census tract data, and you can do all the linking you want. So shapefiles are pretty globally used in almost any GIS software, and you can download it and do your own analysis. So, Tim?
Yeah, I was just gonna say one thing on that point. Just talking with a colleague who's kind of proposing that, maybe utilities are a little nervous about finding out if they have service lines, because then lead service lines. So it's unknown what percentage of the country might have those, or in this data set. I mean, this data set's kind of an example, but with some of these funding mechanisms, there's more, I guess, funds, resources available to go find out, is the main thing too. A couple quick things on here I think we can answer since we just have a few minutes left. John asked, what is the timing of grant funding? When are applications due? I think we can answer that one pretty quickly since the bill hasn't been passed. Still very much up in the air, I think, with that one, unfortunately, John. And then Mackenzie asked, can you set up alerts within the system for inspections or maintenance activities? Info Asset Planner, the software I was showing, is very much a planning level solution. If you're looking for alerts to be sent to you, email, I'm assuming maybe, or text messages, we have other solutions for that. And Info Asset Planner can interact with some Esri tools like Workforce and Survey 123, but it's very much a planning level software. So sending alerts is not its forte, I guess you could say, but we do have other tools to help you with that. I'll say
Yeah,
there.
I was looking at that one, and and we are very much, Info Asset Planner is an asset performance and risk modeling software, right? We can codify that more like the strategic, your asset management plan. It is very much, we calibrate the model based on, input from your CMMS or your EAM. And so that's really where we see, those sorts of alerts being issued. I know, Tim, you've done some, presentations on integration with Esri's workforce for Arcgis, that has some minimal alerting capabilities. But again, we work with most of the major CMMSs, for, that sort of management, right? A question about, service lines, kind of mentioned, the question came up, how do they get replaced? Is there a mechanism for homeowners to get this replaced? Fantastic question. We see globally that our neighbors to the north, Canada, they've been very proactive, right? And they go in with, it gets us into that holistic right-of-way management I mentioned. They have programs going on, the utilities, where, they don't own the service lines either, but what they're doing is they're coordinating, they're being very innovative and creating public, service line replacement programs where they'll say, all right, we've prioritized this main, we believe there's lead service lines, and they actually help coordinate with contractors to kind of do bulk replacement, right? Rather than having 20 contractors come in and do a service line here, and then 2 months later do that one, and then, a year later do the next one. They actually say, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to just systematically replace, because as you all know, mobilization costs are expensive. And so it's a bit disruptive for a neighborhood, but it's one and done, right? You get the whole neighborhood done. There's economies of scale. So Canada's been very creative, and that's something we'll be looking out for as people are applying for these bills. This grant funding is, how creative they are on some of these, because your question is perfect, right? It's these service lines haven't been, part of the utility asset registry, and just, I think there's a lot of to be determined and worked out once we get this bill passed.
Perfect. Well, that brings us to our hour. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you, David, for helping out today and providing your experience and viewpoints and all that you've been working on recently. And we'll see everybody back here next week as we dive further into kind of stormwater infrastructure. John, you had a great question, and we're going to really get into that $60 billion that's in part section 914 that serve water, wastewater, and stormwater. So I'll be getting into that further next week. Thanks, everybody.
Been a real pleasure. Thanks.